So, welcome everyone to today's webinar on building a QAD integration with AI. My name is Sophie. I run the marketing here at Versori, and today I'm helping George, who's our head of growth, as he talks you through the content of the webinar. Some housekeeping before we go any further. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. We'll break to answer as we go, and we'll also have time to answer the questions at the end. So I believe, without further ado, I will pass over to you, George.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sophie. So thanks everyone for taking the time to come through and take a look at this demo today. We're going to be talking through exactly how we look at building an integration with AI, specifically into QAD, which is a manufacturing system or an MES or an ERP, depending on how you want to term their different products. But we're going to talk through a few things. We're going to talk through the common challenges you find with integrations of this nature, why those challenges exist relative to current software options, how we kind of have tackled those for a particularly large ERP client, and then how technically within the platform we tackle those issues during the build phase. So we'll flick through some slides. We're going to hop back and forth to a demo, a short video. And if you see the polls in the chat on the right-hand side, definitely feel free to fill those out as we go. So the first thing is pre-built connectors. And when it comes to ERPs, large manufacturing systems, anything of a nature that results in customers customizing their platform, and as a result, the API generally requiring some level of customization, pre-built connectors are an immediate bottleneck the moment you want to build an integration. Now, why is that the case? One, maybe your connector, your pre-built connector that you have to connect to this particular API within your Ocado or your Boomi or your Soligo doesn't support the fields that the customer actually has in their instance. Maybe they've added a custom object, a custom field, some custom business logic. That is not reflected in the pre-built connector that something like Ocado might offer. And so immediately you've got to go either customize for that or work around it. The second problem then comes post-deployment. You build your integration, it's all functioning, great, and you hit deploy. And then someone pushes an API update. And suddenly all that work you've done to make sure that integration functions perfectly, you've customized the connector to handle their custom fields, no longer works because someone is pushing an update and now you have a break-in change. And that, while for a single integration might be a small problem, scale that to an enterprise, the size of which would use something like QAD. And suddenly you might have 10s, 20, 50, 100 breaks that you're now trying to chase down. And this really leads us nicely onto our next point. The state of pre-built iPaaS connectors today. And so as we discussed, a connector is the piece of software, or the piece of the software rather, that allows a workflow tool like Ocado or Boomi or Soligo to connect to an API. So they have a connector for QAD, they have a connector for SAP, they have a connector for QuickBooks. The problem with those is they're pre-built. And the pre-built means they can't be customized, or at least the customization is very limited, often very clunky, and generally requires a large amount of time to configure them for custom fields, custom objects, custom business logic. Additionally, and what this diagram on the right really perfectly outlines, is even once you have it configured, you end up in this endless loop of maintenance and a very costly support program as a result of kind of API updates and API upgrades. So just to follow this diagram from kind of top clockwise, if we push an API change, so maybe QAD updates their API. Now that connector that you have that is custom to that particular, your QAD instance or your customer's QAD instance now needs to be rebuilt. So you rebuild that connector to account for the changes for the new API update. Now that's had a knock-on effect on your integration. So you go and you perform all the regression testing to check that integration still functions as you want. If not, you make the upgrades. You then redeploy in your iPaaS, you put in place all your production monitoring again. And then by the time you've done all of that, 3-4 weeks later, someone else has pushed another API update. And suddenly you're back to the beginning. And you can see why at an enterprise level, for IT teams, they spend 35% of their time just on integration maintenance alone, just because of the compound and cyclical nature of this challenge. So when Cispro approached us, and Cispro is another ERP similar to QAD, their customers had this exact issue. Cispro was spending 3 to 4 weeks customizing a pre-built connector. So they had a standard Cispro connector that they would offer within different workflow tools like Ocado. And the problem was the moment a client wanted their integration to reflect their Cispro instance, they were spending weeks just customizing just the connector to make it recognize the API for that particular Cispro instance. They were then spending another 3 to 6 months building the ERP integration. That's not weeks, that's months of time spent to make the integration work end to end. So as a result, whether it was a pre-built integration to deploy to their marketplace for multiple customers to use, or a one-off integration to aid in the deployment of a new customer, this process meant deployment was taking huge amounts of time and very high costs from a professional services standpoint. On top of that, once they deployed the integration, and back to the cyclical diagram we saw before, they were spending over a month a year on each integration conducting maintenance. So overall, they're spending months of time per integration, and very quickly that accumulates to one person really only being able to handle 2 to 3 integrations a year to actually be able to sustain hundreds of integrations that Cispro needs to, was becoming a monumental lift. And so this is where the Connect agent comes in. And we can pause here and we're going to talk a little bit about what Versori does, how we do it, and specifically the key components along the way. So Versori is an AI-enabled integration platform. What does that mean? It means we use a series of AI tools, from LLMs to RAG systems to MCP, to automate the process of building an integration. And building integration doesn't just mean writing the code. It means, how can we automate the design process? Can we save a solution architect the weeks or days of time they spend reading documentation and testing in Postman? Can we automate that? Can we automate the design phase? Can we automate the process of ensuring the integration performs as we expect? Can we then automate the build process, the testing process, the deployment process, and then ultimately, of course, the maintenance process too? Now, the Connect agent is the part of the tool that allows us to build and customize connectors to an API. And so this is what tackles the challenge of pre-built connectors. Whereas a pre-built connector is a team assembling an integration or assembling a connector for an API ahead of time, our Connect agent is able to dynamically spin up a connector for an API on the fly and customize that connector for the customer's instance of that API, all in a matter of seconds. So you can see here at the top, we would enter credentials for that API, and we can show you a demo in a second, and it will generate the connector. We can then co-request up into that particular account for that particular client. It will take co-request up via that API, grab any custom fields, custom objects, and configure the connector dynamically for that particular client. Now you have a connector that mimics the client's account, and instead of weeks, it took a matter of seconds. And importantly, when an API is then changed, that process of updating the connector is now not, again, a multi-step process. It's just a case of rerunning the API docs and rerunning the co-request to kind of re-update the connector for the new version. So I'm going to hop over and give a quick demo while I'm setting that up. Sophie, I don't know if you want to run the first poll that we have for today.
Yeah, definitely. So we currently have a poll running in the chat already, which is about what your biggest integration challenges are today. I'm going to drop a second poll in the chat around how often do integrations result in project delays. This is obviously a consistent problem that we come across throughout all of our dealings with customers, especially in the ERP space. So super interested to gather your answers to that one.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophie. So to hop back in, we're going to give a quick demo. And the demo, we're going to walk through a few steps. We're going to walk through the Connect agent, how that works, a little bit of the planning agent. We're then going to go back and review just a few slides while it's running the build process in the background. And then we'll hop back in and go through the build after that. So you can see here, we start with a prompt, and we're in the plan agent, which is one of our 3 core agents. And so we're going to start here with every time an order is executed in paperless parts, create the work order in QAD. Now, this is a relatively simple workflow. You can actually add in here diagrams, you can add in here multiple steps, you can add in here, maybe you already know some of the mappings. But for now, we're just going to keep it relatively simple. I'm also going to add some API docs for paperless parts. So I'm just going to throw that in here, right here. And then we're also going to quickly do a Google search for QAD API. Now, I'm not actually going to grab this API, and we'll show you why in a minute. But I just want you to make note that this is available on the internet. So the platform is now going away and conducting a few different steps. The plan agent, which we'll go through some slides in a second, is going to basically conduct 3 key steps. One, it's going to do a very thorough internet search. So it's looking for QAD documentation, for paperless parts documentation. We've already fed it, but it's also going to pull as much documentation as it can from online. It's also going to pull from our RAG store. And so our RAG store has about 5,000 open API specs that we've constantly added, keep updated, and version control. And the platform will look to that for another source of truth. And then finally, it's going to take and break down and try and understand the workflow that we've given it, which in this case is relatively simple. It's then going to do 3 other follow-on steps. One, it will ask us any clarifying design questions. These are questions that a human needs to input for the system to make sure the integration performs as you expect, much like a solution architect would ask a client about specifics of a workflow. It will do the same for us. Second, it will spin up the connectors. So it will take the documentation, it will understand which documentation it believes is the correct documentation, and then it will spin up the connectors and test the endpoints for us. And then finally, it will assemble a final research package. And that research is effectively like saying, okay, here's the workflow I want to build, here's all the documentation, and here's my core understanding of both systems. And those 4 is what we're going to put together for it to produce the solution document, which is exactly how we're going to build the integration. So you can see here, it's actually gone through and conducted that web search already, and is now just beginning to assemble the final pieces. So we're going to hop back and talk through a couple of slides just while we're waiting for this to complete running. So I'm just going to unshare my screen and go back here. So this diagram really nicely explains how the system is functioning. So you can see here, I just added a prompt. Now here you'll notice it says in-depth prompt. Ours is relatively high level, and I think that's actually a very good test of how much reasoning the platform can do. We'll give it files and attachments. So as I said, if you had a diagram, if you had a mapping document, you can put this in, and then we'll give it documentation links. And the documentation links are just as we inputted with paperless parts. It's going away, and the plan agent is running that internet search that I just mentioned, and it's going to produce clarifying questions, which we'll go back for in a second. It's also pushing this off to the connect agent, and the connect agent is beginning to generate the connector. So this is the process we walked through before. It will spin up into the system, turn the API into a connector, and then co-request to configure any custom fields or custom objects. Then finally, and we'll get to this in a minute, the plan agent is going to produce the solution document, and that solution document is going to run the build agent. We're going to give that a few more minutes just to keep running. In the meantime, we're going to play a short video on how we use RAG within the software to help improve the level of information we can feed to our agents around documentation and around system understanding.
In the world of ERP systems, there is no catch-all. One company needs advanced routing capabilities, another needs to reject certain items from input. Traditional integration methods either offer out-the-box integrations that never quite meet requirements or take over 12 months to implement. Modern enterprises shouldn't have to compromise on key business processes. So how does Versori differ? That's where we utilize RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation in Versori AI. In other words, this is a knowledge base that we can create for each and any system. Versori uses multiple RAG-based agents behind the scenes, supporting web search, knowledge of well-known systems, and also current knowledge bases for your internal or bespoke systems. When we upload a system's knowledge base, like SysPro's documentation, Versori AI learns how the system actually works, its business objects, validation rules, and data structures. So when the AI builds an integration, it's not guessing, and the user can question the specific business objects that they need. It knows which objects to call, how to format the data, and how to avoid validation errors before they happen. This results in fully contextual integrations. And as this RAG-powered knowledge grows, every new integration in the organization benefits. So this knowledge base becomes the anchor for every integration in your roadmap, accelerating development across your ecosystem. If you have 20 systems to connect to your own software, half the work is already done every single time.
Awesome. So hopefully that gives you a quick outline of a little more depth about how we use RAG, but also how as a solution architect, we're not just augmenting the build process, we're actually augmenting the design process too, which is, I think, is really where a lot of kind of current iPaaSes miss the mark. Half the work is not building today. 75% of the work is understanding what you need to build and how you're going to build it. And the RAG really enables us to do that. Jumping back to the screen share, we're going to finish off this demo really quickly. So please just let us know in the chat if you can't see this. But back to our original demo, you can see here it's now run the research. It's now generated, as we mentioned, a set of documentation around each system, how it works, how it functions, and also kind of any endpoints that we might need to be aware of. And it's done this for both systems. So you can see here it's got QAD, and here it's looking at technical resources. Now, it's also generated a set of questions. So these are questions that a solution architect would normally handle with a client. So I'll go in here. It's asked about integration event handling strategy for paperless parts, and specifically whether we want to do polling-based or webhook-based. For now, I'm going to say polling-based, and it will probably assume a number of times it wants to pull per day or per hour. Also said it's slightly unclear when exactly a work order should be created in QAD based on parts order status. So we're going to say immediately upon confirming an order is purchased. I'm going to give that. We're going to close this one. And so we would go through these systematically. I'm just going to give some high-level answers for these today, just so we can keep this demo moving. So we're actually just going to tell it to check the documentation here. So this indicates to us that it probably doesn't have documentation. But for now, we're just going to ignore this one. And then what are the specific QAD API endpoints and authentication methods for creating work orders? So again, this suggests that the nature of being critical means the documentation is pulled from the internet is not quite enough. And this is where we might come in and add some API docs. So I'm going to go here and pull up the APIs. I'm going to pull this up here. I'm going to give this here. Now, this might not complete the demo entirely, but it will at least get it started with somewhere to look. So we're going to close this off. Now, the platform then is going to generate workflows and connect to the systems. And so we're going to set it off generating the workflows now while we look at the connectors. So you can see here, it's thought two connectors, QAD and paperless parts. And we're just going to rerun these so they ensure the most up-to-date pull has come through. And you'll see here that it's pulled in paperless parts' API and the 4 GET functions that come within that API. And if I click one of these, this system on the right effectively functions like a low-level postman. And so you can treat this exactly as run queries, input headers, bodies, etc., just as you normally would. Now, if we manage the authentication here, you can see paperless parts is an auth key, is an API key, which is identified here. And I can come here and add connections. So say I wanted to add my Sandbox account, I would add a new connection right here. If you wanted this integration to be serviceable to multiple customers, i.e. you want it to be embedded, we would just flick this button here. And now the platform is going to be capable of understanding or capable of implementing the systems necessary to manage multiple authenticated end users. Now, we understood here that the system didn't identify QAD docs. And so this is why this particular connector agent is now effectively stalled. As you'll see here in the plan agent, it's actually gone ahead and highlighted the fact that we don't necessarily know what QAD looks like. And so this is where, again, working with the client, you would generally have QAD documentation. You would go back, you'd be able to input this, and then run the system based on that QAD documentation. Even so, it's been able to generate workflow documentation based on these systems just by making a set of core assumptions. So we're now going to go to the build agent. So this is an example of a pre-built example. And you can see here, all we've done is after the plan was completed, we've gone to build, entered the workflow. For this is a paperless parts Epicor documentation. We selected Epicor because their docs are available online. It will then build this integration. So it's gone away, entered this prompt, and it will assemble the integration in two formats. A flow mode, that is effectively a low-code tooling. You can come in here, you can prompt the system to edit different steps, but there's also a code mode. And the platform actually primarily runs on code. The reason for this is traditional code platforms are generally frustrating to developers. They bottleneck you. They don't allow you to edit in the most fluid way. It's an environment you've got to learn and keep remembering as it makes upgrades. Instead, Versori aims to look just like an integrated development environment within its code environment, making it seamless and easy to go in here to immediately start editing and have maximum customization. Now, within here, we have different packages, and you can actually see how those packages translate to mappings directly here. So you see how the platforms configure these mappings, and this is the real other value point of Versori. All the necessary documentation that you might need to produce for an integration, whether that's for the end client, whether that's for your internal team to ensure good maintenance strategies down the line, in case you leave the company and someone else takes over this integration. All of this is produced immediately and accurately relative to the integration. And as Sophie's RAG video explained, you can directly query that. So you don't need to worry about one, generating documentation, and two, ensuring it remains up to date. So this integration is now built. All we would do is go ahead and click deploy. That integration would then run via Versori's run system. Now this is the SDK that plugs into our hosting, deployment, our logging, our monitoring, all of which is accessible here. And so this is really an end-to-end solution for your integrations. So I think that about rounds up the demo. If you have any other questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And while we're waiting on some questions, we're just going to touch on the outcomes that CISPRO was able to achieve working with Versori on their ERP integrations. So as we mentioned before, CISPRO spent months building an integration, often a whole month just customizing a connector, and then multiple months more building the integration logic. With Versori, that pre-built connector phase was reduced down to just 3 days. So they were able to customize the CISPRO connector for any custom fields, any custom logic in a matter of days. And actually, most clients, it takes a matter of minutes. Some clients, of course, have very particular implementations that require a little more time. The average integration build time went from months down to a matter of weeks. And so whereas previously they were having to spend half a year of resources with an engineer deploying an integration, one engineer can now build many integrations back to back extremely quickly. And even once that engineer had built all those integrations, the maintenance didn't become a burden. Maintenance is expected to be about 1 to 3 days annually for each of their integrations, meaning a single engineer could build 20 integrations a year and still maintain all those integrations and keep building new integrations the following year, which has allowed them to scale to potentially hundreds of integrations for that pre-built marketplace and hundreds more across their professional services team as they deploy custom deployments for their clients. That about wraps up our demo for today. If you have any other questions, if you want to fill out the Q&A, please feel free to. If you have any other questions, Sophie and I will hang around for kind of another 5-10 minutes. Please feel free to throw them in the chat. We're happy to answer them, whether that's about the product, technicals, pricing, how we work in the market. Definitely feel free to let us know. And then we will always send out an email afterwards with this recording if you want to watch it back or share with your colleagues afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you for watching, everybody. We got some interesting answers on the poll, George, if you want to run through those. So the first one, which was, what's your biggest integration challenge today? The highest answer was third-party APIs.
Interesting.
I don't know if you might want to talk a little bit around that. And then the second poll, which was how often do integrations result in project delays? The highest answered response was frequently, which obviously comes as no surprise.
Yeah. No, so third-party APIs that's really where the power of the Connect agent comes in. So we talked about the Connect agent, and maybe we can flick back to the slide that outlines that. The beauty of the Connect agent is you're no longer limited to a pre-built connector. The Connect agent can dynamically absorb any API. And so that doesn't have to be a publicly available one. Our biggest client is Walmart. They have a bunch of internal APIs. Normally, a platform would have to spend weeks like onboarding that. We just grab the documentation and we're good to go. And then, of course, the second thing is the call request, the ability to pull up and grab custom fields. Even if you have the documentation for a third-party API, you might not understand how it's customized. And so that's where the call request really becomes powerful. I think the third thing to touch on there is, as you said for your RAG video, which is once we have an API doc absorbed and we put it in our RAG and then we forever monitor the link where we originally found it, we have a complete and thorough understanding of exactly how that API functions. And as a solution architect, particularly like you're a QAD solution architect and someone's asked you to build an integration to paperless parts and you've never worked with paperless parts before, you now effectively have a workmate that can query questions for you against the API, so you don't have to spend hours reading the documentation. It makes the whole process of understanding that third-party API much, much faster. So question from Sujit. Apologies if I mispronounced that. Appreciate your kind feedback on the demo. Apologies, we had a slight bump in the road today, but a live demo is always fun. How will you bypass the API limitations that some of the ERP systems offer, where you can do certain things via UI, but not via API? So that has been the biggest challenge. Also, can you elaborate on maintaining the API versioning more? Yeah, the core product is effectively what you would call an iPaaS. The beauty of Versori's product, though, is actually the bolt-ons that we built within it. And those bolt-ons right now consist of two core parts. One, we use a lot of very modern AI techniques to do very complex data transformations. So we just completed a project for a large HR platform. I think we're running like 56 table cross-referencing for that particular workflow. They were spending like months building the logic to make sure it worked, to make sure they caught all the edge cases. Instead, one of our transformation models actually ran that within like a couple of days on its own. So that's one piece. The second bolt-on is around RPA. And so we know that when we get into some of these older systems, there are pieces that are not API native. There are also pieces that, even if they have APIs, there are people still working on PDFs and emails and even in physical documents. The RPA module provides us a way to extend the capabilities of an API into the UI by reading fields, by reading buttons, by reading actions that the user might undertake, so that we can work with things that aren't API based. And so we do that both for RPA. We also have an EDI module that converts EDI into APIs. So we can do EDI based things. We can do S3, flat files, databases. Really the kind of limitations are, really the opportunity is infinite. And we just build a bolt-on for all these different UI kind of related tasks that might not filter into an API. So can you let me know that just answers your question? Apologies if that was a little bit of a wandering answer. The other thing was around version control. So the best example here is to walk through your example. So if we built that QAD paperless parts integration and paperless parts pushes an update tomorrow to the API docs. Now, Versori is constantly monitoring that API docs. And so if they posted a notification or a bar on that page ahead of time notifying you that the change was coming in advance, we might have even picked that up before it even happened. But what the platform is going to do is it's going to grab that new documentation. It's going to duplicate the integration, take the duplicate, take your sandbox credentials, and then edit and run the integration with that new API docs. It will identify any break-in changes. It will then run the fixes, and it will reassess the integration based on the success criteria. So when the platform generates a solution document, it actually generates a large amount of success criteria. Like, how do we define a good integration in this scenario? It will use that to retest the duplicate to make sure that new updated API follows the same logic and achieves the same outcome. And from there, it will flag to a human. So we then set it up with an email that pings to a human, and a human gets a notification saying, hey, we just ran this API update. We think everything works. Here's the outcome. Here's a summary. Can you just run as a human in the loop, run and check this is everything that you expect? And then we'll push it live from there. And then we can version control on that too. So you can have 2 live. And if one customer jumps to the new one and one customer doesn't, that's all handled within the back end of the platform. Again, apologies. That was a long and meandering answer. So I hope that covers everything you wanted to learn about, Sujit. Amazing. So just quickly before we hop off, if anybody has any other questions, definitely feel free to drop them in. If anybody is interested in some one-on-one time, just to go over any further questions, to get a much more in-depth demo, if you have an example you really want to talk through, we can talk through that. And actually, for any QAD interested customers, our CEO will also be joining those demos, as we do a lot of ERP work for CISPRO, and is very intrigued to learn more about the QAD ecosystem. And then, Sophie, do you want to touch a little bit on the white paper?
Yeah, sure. So earlier this week, we actually released our latest white paper around ERP connectivity. Covers everything that George has covered in today's webinar, but gives a bit more of a holistic view of the entire ERP market landscape, traditional integration methods, how our Connect agent overcomes key challenges. So I've dropped the link in the chat. Feel free to download it, get your copy. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. And thank you all for watching today.